You show. Every week or so, I get together with thought leaders and we talk about the trends that are happening in the world. And we think of life from a mind, body, and spirit perspective, because that's what servant leaders do. So join me. Well, greetings, everybody. This is Mike Rochelle. I'm here with Steve Gandara, the Managing Director of Excellent Cultures. And we're going to have a conversation today about Steve Gandara. So, Steve, how you been doing?
I think I'm doing fine.
Yeah.
I think I'm doing fine.
Well, it's a beautiful day outside. Thanks for coming out on this Friday afternoon to share with me. Growing the Next Version of You is my show, sort of a gift to the world. Bringing dialogue back, right? Because after the pandemic and everybody hating each other and being mean to each other, I figured that we needed to have conversations. Now, I don't think that you and I disagree on much, but if we do, I'll ask that we have a civil conversation in the model of dialogue. But I don't think we're going to go there. This is really mostly about you. So I want to know, where were you born? Who were your parents? What were your cultural heritage? What were your faith bases? All those kinds of things. And we're going to talk for about an hour or so. So
awesome.
How did you start?
Born in West Texas, El Paso. My dad was second generation Mexican American, high school football coach and a teacher. My mother was a New Mexican. Her family actually settled the territory in New Mexico. Her mother's family they named the county after them in New Mexico.
Where did they come from?
They came from Spain.
Oh, wow.
From Spain. Originally Ireland, and then they migrated to Spain, and then to New Mexico.
The original.
Yeah, they were Oteros. They became Oteros, and then they named the county after them in New Mexico. That was my mother's family.
Very cool. Very cool. So, growing up in El Paso, what was the situation back then?
It was kind of very different than what it is now.
Okay.
It was racism was anti-Hispanic instead of more anti-Black. Mm-hmm. Yet it was not something that you just dealt with every single day. Mm-hmm. But, my dad was second generation. His dad was a Mexican revolutionary, actually was a Roman Catholic, grew up in the Catholic Church. At that time, the communists were infiltrating Mexico and began to persecute the clerics in the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. He thought that was unjust, so he went to Rome to get a papal permission to start a holy war. The Pope said no, he couldn't condone violence. He did it anyway. Got caught smuggling guns across the border, and locked up. Frame is this? Oh, let's see. This would have to be 30s, 40s. This is my grandfather.
Oh, wow.
30s, 40s, and locked up in federal penitentiary in Arizona, and wrote a letter to President Harding, obtained a presidential pardon, got out of jail. My grandmother, his wife, was a Spanish woman born in Mexico on vacation. Aristocratic Spanish woman. Yeah. She was one of the first women pharmacists in the state of Texas. Strong female matron. And they had 5 children. She pretty much raised them herself. Because my granddad was, in prison most of the time. When he got out, he founded a travel agency with the author of the Perry Mason novels, Earl Stanley Gardner, and they did very well in business, taking Americans into the interior of Mexico. Mm. Pretty much on whale watching expeditions in Lower California and the Grand Canyon of Mexico. the Copper Canyon is called, Los Barrancas.
Okay. So let's go back. You said something that those in the audience may not know about our great state. I'm a third generation Texan. So racism was a part of the underlying nature of what we were. Specifically, you'll probably not like this term, but wetbacks was the term.
Yeah, filthy Mexicans.
Yeah,
is what they call us. Filthy Mexicans.
So what was the environment in El Paso then as you were growing up?
Well, my parents, I had great parents. I mean, they were, today, if your parents even stay married and, they're non-alcoholics or drug addicts and you're not beaten and abused, then you have good parents. And I had great parents. I mean, they were solid. My dad was, had a strong work ethic, worked his way up, got a college education, worked his way up from in coaching and teaching into business, did well in business, owned a few businesses. And so it was not really something that I experienced a lot of as a child. But, the vivid memory I have when I remember I'm naturally left-handed, but we only had one baseball mitt, and it was right-handed, and one set of golf clubs, and they were right-handed. And so I learned how to play golf. I learned how to play golf and baseball right-handed. And of course, my throwing was terrible. So I remember finally, when my dad, got a job that was above a teacher's salary, and I got a real left-handed mitt. He was teaching me how to throw left-handed, and I was terrible at that as well. And, just one of those memories that you have forever. Mm-hmm. And, when he wasn't coaching football or teaching school, he was a boxing coach. He was a Golden Gloves fighter. Mm-hmm. And so, he could hold his own, although I never saw him be violent with anybody, including us. Sure. Yet, we were playing, it was dark, and he was, just a coach's coach, always coaching, always teaching, always training. And we were playing catch, and we had to go up the street, up our hill, to be under the street light. And, I would throw these terrible wild throws, and he would miss them, and they'd roll into this garden on the neighbor's yard. And I still remember the, I don't know how old they were because I never really saw their faces much. They came to this window, and it was a high level window, and were upset because the ball rolled into their garden. Didn't do any damage, but they were upset. And, began to rail on my dad and, made a comment like, you filthy Mexican, get your baseball out of our, our garden. And he says, excuse me. And the woman says, well, didn't your mother ever teach you any manners? And the husband says, well, if he even had a mother. And that was it. So Dad says, come out here and say that. They could tell by his voice that he better not come out there. So we picked up the ball. But I mean, that was kind of my first experience with it. That, and then I found out later that
so what decade are we talking?
Yeah, let's see. Probably the late 50s, early 60s.
Okay.
Late 50s, early 60s.
Okay.
And then, then I found out later as I, grew older and, got to talk more to my dad about his experience that, he tried, everything to, the only way you could really generate more revenue as a teacher and a coach was to, move to college and become a college coach. And even though he had a teaching certificate and a bachelor's degree in business, he really didn't have what it took or I don't think he had the desire to be a college coach. So he took several sales jobs, sold vacuum cleaners, we moved to Beaumont and sold cemetery property, and a hurricane came in and flooded the cemetery. And that was the end of that. And I remember when I was 5 years old, we moved into my grandmother's house, the woman pharmacist who was the strong, matronly figure. Mm-hmm. And I have these memories of she lived in a decent middle-class home. But when my dad would come home, and I didn't know why we were living there, but I figured it out later that it was because times were tough. And he would always park in the alley behind her house and then jump over the fence into the backyard when he came home. And I finally figured out the reason he was parking in the alley was because the tow truck was probably chasing his car. But anyway, he worked his way out of that. We got a home, bought a home, and he went into the auto business and sold cars at a Buick dealership, and was always a high achiever, always an overachiever. He was a football coach in the Lombardi era, so we knew there was no gain without pain. You've got to pay the price. Lombardi time starts 10 minutes early. If you're not there, then you're late. That was kind of the mantra of my three brothers and I. We were raised by, a football coach. And in the process, I found out later that he would work his way up to sales manager, and the guy who owned the business would always demote him because he didn't want to have a Mexican as a sales manager. And then he would make sure that he sabotaged the white guy who came in to replace him so that he could get his job back. And after 3 times he did that, he finally got fed up and just left and, started his own used car business. And General Motors actually came after him because of his track record of success and recruited him. And he was the first, before they had a minority development program, he was the first General Motors minority dealer. They sold him a dealership that they were going to close in Galveston, South Texas, on the Gulf Coast. And so, we moved to Galveston. He took his life savings, which was the insurance policy, the equity in the house, borrowed $12,000 each from his mother and his mother-in-law, promised them he would support them for the rest of their lives if they'd loan it to him. And that was his down payment. And then he basically, General Motors had a finance program that was basically indentured slavery, in that you would got paid a salary for managing the business. You didn't own it. You owned a piece of it based upon your down payment, which, they wouldn't do it unless all your skin was in the game. Every penny of net worth invested in the business. So smart decision. But he got paid bonuses based upon the profitability of the dealership. But the only way he could buy stock was from his bonuses. So the more you perform, more the profitability there was, the higher your bonus, but the higher the stock price went. So he would borrow money to pay his taxes and use all of his bonus to buy stock, paid it off in 4 years, which was a record. And then they gave him a larger Buick dealership in Oklahoma, and we moved there, and he did the same thing there in 4 years. And when he retired, I think he had like 6 car dealerships.
Wow.
And, I kind of grew up in and around the family business. By the time I got to college, it was Vietnam era. So I had a low draft number. It was a lottery. And so I joined ROTC, Army ROTC, because if you're going to be in the military, you'd be better off, I thought, to be an officer and not get shot at. And then I found out that it was a second lieutenant, so we're getting shot at by the Viet Cong. And
the insignia.
They knew who the second lieutenants were, the young green officers. And so I was headed to Vietnam, but was in a, just by the grace of God, got my left eardrum blown up by an artillery simulator in training. And they moved me from infantry to the quartermaster corps. So instead of going to Fort Benning to learn how to, lead a patrol in the jungle, I went to Fort Lee to learn how to manage an officers club, and totally different environment. And then by the time that I finished officers training and had my first real position as an executive officer of a cook's company, all the guys, the first day I showed up, the CO hands me a file box full of 3x5 cards. Well, what's this? He says, that's your job. And I opened it up, and there was a file on every one of the men. And this was all the cooks, Company H for cooks. And my job was there was a card with all of the phone numbers and contact info for their landlord, their, whoever financed their car, whoever they owed. And my job was to make sure they always paid their bills, and when they didn't, to keep them from having their, get thrown out of their apartment or their house.
So they couldn't cook.
Yeah, or their car repossessed. So that was an experience. And then the war was de-escalating, so they kicked us out early of the regular Army and put us in a reserve unit so they wouldn't have to pay us extra benefits. And got promoted to first lieutenant, finished 8 years in the reserves. And at that time, the military then was totally different than it is now. It's not, we got spit on when we had our uniforms on, by the guys in the Jesus Revolution. the hippies would spit on us because we were the bad guys, and basically all we were doing was what we thought we were supposed to do.
Right.
So it was a very different climate,
Yeah,
and
interesting times for sure.
Yeah.
Right. So going back to childhood, so your grandparents started out in the Roman Catholic Church, or I suppose.
Yeah, I went to Catholic schools from kindergarten through high school.
Okay. And were you Catholic at that point?
Well, once a Catholic, always a Catholic back in the day.
Yeah.
And my family, they practiced their faith. We were in mass every Sunday, went to Catholic schools from kindergarten through high school, met my wife in a Catholic high school in Oklahoma. So, yeah.
Very cool. So the climate then, when you get back from Vietnam, not only are you a ex-military guy, but you're also a Mexican American. So was it any better when you got back?
What our dad taught, what my dad taught us was just to not care. Mm-hmm. To just, if you get knocked down, get up and keep punching, and don't stop.
Right.
And, we just didn't even notice it, didn't notice it. I mean, and it was so much to the extent where when there was something going on, so much different than today, where people are so hypersensitive, to racial slurs or anything else. I mean, he just taught us to, focus on our life, focus on the goals that we had in front of us, and make good choices, do the right thing, always keep your word, keep your commitments, and work hard, and everything would turn out okay.
Very good.
And so that's pretty much what we did. And he was a great role model, great leader, high integrity, well thought of. He was an overachiever. So the people in General Motors that he represented, thought highly of him, and he ended up with 6 car dealerships, I think, when he retired.
Awesome. So now you've come back from Vietnam.
I actually never went. I came back. I was in Fort Lee.
Okay.
And then right before they sent us to Vietnam, the war was de-escalating.
Okay.
And so I went to the reserves.
Okay.
Fortunately, never got over there and got shot at. The guys who did really came back beat up and frustrated.
Right. So did you guys start having kids right away?
Let's see.
This is a big part of your story.
Yeah. I met my wife. She was my high school sweetheart, junior year in high school. We got married between junior and senior year in college. We went to OU, mm-hmm. and got married between junior and senior year in college. And then we're married 2 years. Let's see, when finished junior and senior year, finished senior year. And then like 6 months after that, went right to Fort Lee, and she was pregnant with our first while we were, on the road to Virginia.
Okay.
So, and then we were in Virginia in Fort Lee for 3 months in the officer's basic course, and got out. They shipped us to a reserve unit, went back to work in the family business, and started a life.
So you started out Roman Catholic, strong family, had some racial experiences. Sounds like from then on, that was not a theme for you.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It was
and really, I can't even, I don't think I would even recognize it was racial experiences, and had I not lived into what's going on today. Yeah, and, filthy Mexican, that's just like somebody calling you stupid.
Right.
Back in the day.
Right.
And, my dad recognized it. But he always taught us to just, shake it off, move on, and keep focused on what's important.
Yeah. So I would say, from my own experience, I grew up in Houston. So when you were down in Galveston, I was in North Shore, which is off of Interstate 10 on the way to Beaumont, near the Budweiser Brewery, if you remember where that is, because it's a everybody smells it when they cook their beer all the time. But anyway, the environment that I grew up in was interesting, because in North Shore, I went to North Shore High School. We had a very large Mexican-American population. We had a very large African-American population and a large white population, but we all went to school together. So it was a, literally integrated. There were some tensions, but nothing like we have today. But from a family perspective, my family were sharecroppers when they moved to Texas in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And they were racist. I mean, they didn't like anybody other than white people, right? And I know that because when my wife and I were married in 91, I had almost nobody from my family come because I was marrying a Mexican. Now, what they didn't understand is that she's Puerto Rican, but there was still that kind of a situation even in the 90s there. Now, fortunately, because my dad and my mom decided to start going to church, it was a different situation for us. And we went to an integrated church with a lot of people from various backgrounds. And that wasn't a part of my upbringing, right? Yeah. So, but it was around us, and it was definitely real. It wasn't something that was put on. The only reason I dwell on that is because for those that deny that it ever happened, well, I know that it happened because I saw it happening. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else we need to say.
Yeah, well, my school, my experience was very much the same. I went to Catholic schools and totally integrated. We had every race that there was.
Sure.
And, and we just thought it was normal.
Yeah.
We just thought it was normal. And then you'd get outside and you'd hear, the racial slurs here and there, but it wasn't anything like it is today.
Right.
Nothing like it is today. We just kind of all got along. It was more important. What seemed to be more important is, how well you did and what you accomplished, as opposed to where you came from or who you were or what race you were.
Right. So again, going back, so you grew up Roman Catholic, but I know that you're more evangelical now.
Yeah.
So how did that?
I'm a Baptist-Costal Protelic.
Okay, say that 10 times fast.
Baptist-Costal Protelic.
So how did that progression happen for you?
Well, when I was 26, I was working in the family business, and my dad, being a football coach and a teacher, was always bringing in one training program after another. And we had two training programs back to back. One was a program about the importance of setting goals in every area of your life. And I remember we did a balance wheel, and I had goals for, every area. My spiritual goal was to find a church that I could relate to, because, I had faith. I prayed my way through college, did well in college, prayed my way through. God always answered my prayers. But, it was kind of dry and boring. So my goal was to find a church that I could relate to. That, to me, that's what spiritual meant.
Right.
And then the second training program was about the psychology of achievement, how to achieve goals. And they happened back to back, and I applied them both and achieved all of my goals. And what I realized on the spiritual side was that it wasn't about there's no problem with the church. It was me, because I was a taker instead of a giver. And so I started contributing and giving, not just money, but time and talent and other things. And as a result, just kept growing in that area. And I remember that area as well as other areas, achieved all my goals. And then I got really miserable. And it was like everything I wanted, I achieved: business goals, family goals, marriage goals, health goals, everything, spiritual goals. Just got miserable. Didn't know why. So I was angry at God, praying, looking for signs in the clouds, couldn't see any, but was struggling. One day we had an office above the garage in one of our homes. And it occurred to me that I had this belief that if I ever totally sold out to God, He would send me to Africa to live in a mud hut and be a missionary. And I didn't want anything to do with mud hut. So, but I was so frustrated and so full of anxiety, and just depressed and frustrated that I screamed at God and said, even a mud hut is better than this. I'll take the stupid mud hut. And I've heard the still small voice for the first time in my life. And he was laughing hilariously. And when I inquired as to what was so funny, he says, you think I'm so stupid I would send somebody with your gifts and talents to live in a mud hut? I've got mud hut people from mud huts. I want you right where you are. And then all of a sudden, all the internal stress and anxiety, it left just like a vaporizing cloud. It was gone.
Right. And
I didn't know what happened, but it was gone. So I called the only spiritual guy that I trusted, who was, we used to give cars to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes for their missionaries, the college athletes, to go and preach in the high schools at the car dealership. And so I knew they had, FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes for Oklahoma, the state. Called him up, Coach Chuck, and told him what happened. He says, well, Steve, you got saved. I said, what's that? And he explained it to me. And then I went home and told my wife, well, I got saved. And she says, well, weren't you always? And I said, no. And in the course of our conversation, we realized the difference between our faith experience was she had the praying nuns in Oklahoma and I had the ruler slapping nuns in Texas. And that was the difference. And, that was my life-changing experience. And it wasn't in a church. It wasn't from a preacher. It was just me and God all by ourselves, and finding out that I had believed a lie my whole life. And when I stopped believing that lie, everything changed. And then as time went on, just kept setting more goals in that area. Had a crazy experience with a guy I had two salesmen in this dealership, and I was a sales manager by then in this car dealership. And one of them was a very kind, sweet young man, born again Christian from Georgia. Another one was a rough and tough, two-fisted Italian kid from the Bronx, New York. And the guy from Georgia, who everybody just loved, he was such a nice man, great young man. He was always our top salesman. Everybody loved him and just bought from him. Yeah. And he came to me one day and said, Steve, I quit. I said, you can't quit. You're my best salesman. And he says, well, why are you quitting? He says, well, the Lord spoke to me and told me I needed to move back to Georgia. And I said, Bob, God doesn't speak to people like that these days. And besides, if he did, he wouldn't tell you to leave. You're my best salesman. And I couldn't talk him out of it. So he leaves. And then like a couple of weeks later, my Italian guy comes in. And he says, Steve, I quit. I said, you can't quit. You're my best closer. His nickname was Catfish. I mean, he was the scavenger. He would just, verbally abuse people until they finally said yes. And so why did you quit? He says, well, the Lord spoke to me. I says, wait a minute. God doesn't speak to people today. And if he did, he would never talk to you because you're a bad man. You're a bad man. And he says, well, I didn't used to believe in God. But I went to this meeting with Tate, the guy from Georgia, and there were all these people there. And there was a woman who had one leg that was shorter than the other by about a foot. And he says, all these people laid their hands on her and prayed for her. And he says, and I saw her leg grow out right before my eyes. And his eyes got about this big. And he said, I didn't used to believe in God, but I sure do now. And I believe he spoke to me and told me that I need to go work in the insurance business. So I quit. And on the way out the door, he gave me this little, it was called Good News for Modern Man, a New Living
track. Yeah,
no, it was a Bible. It was a new paperback, tattered up. It was called Good News for Modern Man. And it was a New Testament in the New Living Translation, Living Bible. Mm-hmm. And so I set another goal to read one chapter in the Bible just to find out what I believed. And then as I would read it, I would realize things, and I would find these promises that were in the scripture, and I would personalize every single one of them. I would write my name by them. And I began to, set goals around them and affirm them and, believe them, and had, just an amazing experience with all kinds of opportunities. And then I had an experience where I read about the 9 gifts of the Spirit. And so I set goals and started imagining and visualizing and had manifestations of all 9. I mean, I laid my hands on a Catholic priest and God healed his heart. He was slated for heart surgery and, bam, he's brand new. And so I told my Baptist buddy what happened. And he goes like this and he says, I don't know if he did this physically, but he did this mentally and emotionally.
Right.
And he introduced me to a white-haired 80-year-old Baptist theologian, Dr. Bill Stewart, and to set me straight. And it turned out that we knew we were going to move from Oklahoma. We didn't know where or when. So we had sold our house and we needed to rent a place. And Coach Chuck had a house that he moved out of and couldn't sell his house. So we rented his house. And it turned out to be right across the street from Dr. Stewart, this white-haired 80-year-old theologian. Mm-hmm. And so, I was running a lot then, and I would run, 3-4 miles and be running around the neighborhood in the Oklahoma heat. And he'd be out there mowing his lawn with a safari hat on, and he'd wave at me. And I'd come back around the block again. And all of a sudden, the lawnmower's going, but no Dr. Stewart. So I run over there and he's laying on the ground flat on his back with the safari hat over there. Are you okay? And he says, well, I had a heart attack, but the Lord's healing me. Go finish your run. And I said, don't you want me to call an ambulance? Or he says, Steve, I told you, the Lord's healing me. Go finish your run. And one more time around the block, he's up mowing the lawn again. And I mean, this guy had so much faith. And then he would he would mentor me. And every time I would have I don't understand this, how does God work, in this situation when, you're trying to figure it out intellectually. And he would turn over here in Isaiah, let's see, look, it says right here, come, let us reason. He would explain that to me. And so one day we had a situation where I'm running again and the still small voice says, take him a check for $500. And just as I passed their house. And I wasn't sure if that was God or not, or my thoughts or something. So, but I wrote a check out, took it over there, knocked on the door. His wife, her name is Melka, a little short, 4'5", 4'3", real short, maybe 4'2". And she says, well, hi, Steve. And I said, I'm not sure if this was God, but this voice spoke to me and told me to bring you a check for $500. And so I did. And her eyes are this big. And she says, well, wait right here. And she's saying, Bill, come here. And so she calls him up. They invite me in, sit down around their coffee table in their living room. And they begin to tell me that he was a retired pastor and he didn't have a retirement account or no retirement money. And the way he made a living was he would record preaching messages on reel-to-reel tape and then send them to a radio station. He had a radio ministry. And then, and she says, last night we needed $500 to pay our radio bill. And, we prayed about it and here you are. And then they began to teach me again, whenever you have a need like that, you never tell anybody. Because you don't want human flesh, you want God. And you never tell anybody, you just trust the Lord and, and here you are. And, as time went on, we ended up moving not long after that to Seattle with a business partner. But I still remember, this guy, he was so wise. Like I only heard him preach one time. He was he stepped in for a pastor at a Baptist church that was on vacation on a Wednesday night. And I went to the service, a powerful, powerful message. But then, the invitation to make a commitment was like tiny and quiet. And I'm used to these televangelists, with the big, loud, God's going to do this for you and that and the other. And, and like 4 or 5 people came up. And afterwards I asked him, your message was so powerful. Why didn't you, he says, Steve, I didn't want any emotion involved. He says, if it's emotion, if there's emotion involved, that's not God. Right. If the Holy Spirit doesn't move somebody, then you're just wasting your time. And I mean, he was like probably one of the wisest people, spiritually at least, that I ever met. And I was just blessed to have him as a mentor when I was in my 20s.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like some interesting folks came into your life and at just the right time to help you along your journey.
Oh yeah, bunch of
which has been my experience in life as well.
Yeah, bunch of them
in a similar way. So I don't want to go away before we talk about your kids. So I'm a underachiever. I only have 3. How many kids do you have? How did it all work out? And how did you do what you did with your wife?
Another unfolding story. We have 11, and 2 are
that's 11. Folks.
Yeah. Two are natural. 9 are adopted. We fostered 11 and adopted 9 out of 11. Then we had 2 the normal way. So we moved not long after that from Oklahoma to Seattle with a business partner. Was in the corporate training business. With a business partner who was had the same guy who taught the psychology of achievement class that I learned about when I worked in the car dealership.
Sure.
Ended up partnering with him and in that business for years, but had marriage problems because I was an overachiever. We had our 2 kids, our natural children, daughter and a son, were middle school, young teenagers, and I was just a goal maniac. I was an overachiever, addicted to achievement, and we had marriage problems, and I couldn't figure out what it was. We went to a counselor. We ended up counseling the counselor. We knew them more than the counselor did. And so, I'm running 5 miles, 10 miles, and thanking God for healing my marriage with every stride. Every stride. I would thank God for healing my marriage. One day I went on a long run. We lived up above Lake Washington in Seattle, beautiful sunny day. Came back 10 miles, endorphins are high, feeling good. My wife's standing at the front door and she has that look in her eye like, oh, you're in trouble. You did it again. And so she says, we need to talk. And we're going up the stairs to the bedroom and I'm praying, oh God, please help me say the right thing. Don't let me step on my tongue again. Help me say the right thing. So we get to the bedroom. She closed the door. I look at her and all of a sudden I realize you're unhappy. And what just popped out of my mouth was, I can't believe how unhappy you are. You deserve to be happy. And if it'll make you happy, I'll move out of here, take my addiction to achievement with me and support you and the kids for the rest of your life. And she broke and began to cry. And in the process of us talking that through, she shared that she'd wanted more children. And we'd had this conversation before and both decided 2 was plenty. I'd already had the surgery. But what happened was my daughter was dating a young man who had 2 brothers who had been abandoned by their mom and raised by their dad. And they spent more time at our house than they did there because we had a family at their own house. Right. And so she realized, I think in that process, that she had a lot more left to do. And so I called a friend in children's services, you got any of those orphans we can check out for the holidays? He laughs and says, there are no more orphans. There's only foster children. And you have to go to class for 6 months to be licensed. But we have an orientation in January. Why don't you come? And so we went, learned things about raising kids that we wish we were known about raising our kids while we were raising them.
Sure.
And we took a placement of there was a 2-month-old infant baby girl who her mom was American Caucasian. Her dad was Iranian Muslim. And they were having culture clash, and the mom put the baby in foster care because she was afraid the dad was going to kill her because she was female. And then an African-American 18-month-old whose mom got pregnant in high school, her husband or her parents disowned her. So she put the baby in foster care so she could get a job and finish high school. And so we kept them for 6 months, fell in love with them. Our kids fell in love with them. And when we gave them back, it broke our hearts, broke our hearts, broke the kids' hearts. So then we kept the next 7, adopted all of them. And
this is all in Seattle.
Yeah, in Seattle. And we were exhausted. I mean, we had 5-month-old twin baby girls living in our bedroom while we were building a nursery. And up all night, rotating feedings. We were exhausted. And so we went to the furniture store to buy a rocking recliner for the nursery. Both of us fell asleep in the recliners in the furniture store. The salesman says, you can't sleep here, so we bought one out of guilt. But on the way home, made a deal, no more kids. This is it. We're done. And like 2 weeks later, I got an invitation to an event in Colorado from a ministry I'd never heard of, Isaiah 58 Ministries. Come to this Christian business consultation, it was called. Threw it away. The next week, I'm in San Francisco doing a pro bono workshop for this pastor that has an animation business. They were making values-based cartoons for kids. And he had 4 very noteworthy supporters. One was a Chinese woman who was the assistant to a very noteworthy, famous Chinese evangelist who they made a movie about. Another one was a Ugandan consultant to the World Bank. Another one was a architect who just finished building a home on the Stanford campus for the founder of Hewlett-Packard's daughter. And another one was a Silicon Valley marketing consultant. Wow. And all 4 of these, noteworthy people began to prevail on me. Aren't you going to this event next week in Colorado Springs? Oh, I never heard of these guys. Well, but you need to go. And especially the Chinese lady, she's, very pushy. Chinese culture is pushy. I mean, they get stuff done. And, you're going. So I called my office and my assistant said something weird happened. She says, every appointment you had next week, except for the trip to Washington, D.C. you didn't want to take, canceled. They canceled. And I called my wife. She says, this could be God. You should go. So I went. It was a powerful conference and a lot of, very meaningful things. But after it was over with, there was my cell wouldn't work in the building. So I'm borrowing a landline, and there was a guy in front of me who his cell wouldn't work either. So he's clearing his voicemail, and he waits until I finish and then looks at me and says, hi, Steve, what do you do for a hobby? And I showed him the picture of all the kids. This is my hobby. Mm-hmm. And he says, do you want another one? I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I'm a pastor of a church in San Jose, California. Last week, we had a pregnant alcoholic crack addict come in. She's adamant about the fact she doesn't want to keep the baby. We need parents for this child. The baby will obviously be drug and alcohol affected because she's a crack addict and an alcoholic. And I heard you took kids like this. Will you take this one? And I said, you better let me ask my wife. And inside I'm saying, oh God, please no. We're just worn out. We can't do anymore. And so he says, well, okay, let me know. So I tell my wife, and she says, you better let me pray. And the next day, I call her back and she says, I really feel like we're supposed to take this child. He's going to be a boy. He's going to have red hair, and we're to name him Christopher David because it means bearer of the anointed one, burning up with love for God. And I said, what kind of pizza did you have for dinner? And she says, no, I just really feel this. I mean, I've never felt this strongly about anything. And so she won't leave me alone. And is just aggressive about it. So finally, on Saturday morning, I write an email to this pastor. Can you tell me more information about the child that's going to be born? That's all I said. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I get this voicemail. Oh, hi, Steve. This is Pastor Rich. The baby was born. Got your email, busy weekend. Baby was born on Sunday night. We took him to the hospital. He's miraculously drug and alcohol free. The doctors can't figure out why, because the mom was a crack addict and an alcoholic. Cute little guy, has strawberry hair. So I call him up, Pastor Rich, let me tell you what my wife said. Boy, red hair, Christopher David. He says that the older I get, the more the voice of the Holy Spirit sounds like the voice of my wife. You need to get down here. Here's our attorney. Call him up. He'll do the legal work. Here's the foster mom. Call her up. She's taking care of the baby. So I call the attorney. My wife calls the foster mom. Foster mom says, what are you going to name this little boy? She said, Christopher David. Line goes quiet. Well, what's the matter? She says, well, last night, my 3-year-old grandson was sitting in the car seat next to the baby when we drove him home from the hospital from out of nowhere. He says, Grandma, we should name this baby Christopher David. How do you say no to that? You don't. So Chris is 24 now. Wow. And then I told that story at a pro bono speaking event 2 years later and met an attorney from Hood River, Oregon. And 2 years after that, he sends an email and, had another story of another child. And that's how we got. And after Chris, I promised God he'd never have to drag me kicking and screaming again. So that's how we got 11. And what's interesting is that the first bunch, just took us to hell and back. We did everything. I mean, juvenile detention, babies out of wedlock, abusive boyfriends, violence, crime. Those kids did everything but kill somebody or kill themselves. It was awful. We had the cops in our driveway 3 times a week, and but the last 2. seemed to learn from, the ones that we said yes to at the end, seemed to learn what not to do from the others who did. And they were like, the reward. Mm-hmm. But since then, every single one of the other 11, have made, just some huge miraculous turns, like, kicked out of a homeless shelter, for carrying a concealed weapon, lived under an overpass, addicted to every drug that there was. 3 years later, Dad, I went into the chapel at the Salvation Army and told God that I was tired of my life, and that if he would, get me off this, I would never do drugs again. And, immediately, gone, no withdrawals, no nothing, now has a child, in a relationship and is having a life. Just multiple stories like that, where these kids would just turn around from the worst lives you could ever imagine. And they're all alive. Most of them should be dead from some of the stuff they did. Yeah. But they're alive and headed in the right direction.
Awesome. That's a great story. So the opening that I should have done is what's become more clear to you lately. I mean, we're in a time now where I don't know, it's a weird time. To me, it seems like we're waiting for something to happen. Yeah. After COVID, it kind of calmed down again for a little while. I don't know exactly what's going to be coming next in the world writ large. But what are the things that you're thinking about these days that are kind of directional, that can help people to think about who they are today, where they could go, and what they can do in the future?
Well, the main thing I think that I've learned through, the life experience and then some from that, is that God has a plan for everybody's life, but God is not a puppet master or a dictator. That, he's a loving father, and human beings have free wills and they can choose to do whatever they want to do. And, God doesn't intervene. Mm-hmm. He's always there if you need him, but it's up to you to make what choices you make. And that if you can find out what that path is, or what that plan is, his perfect will. The scripture says he has a good will, an acceptable will, and a perfect will. Yeah. But if you can find out what that perfect will is and put yourself in a position where you can decipher it and live in it and walk in it and make decisions based upon it and be led by his spirit instead of whatever you feel or whatever you think or your emotions, and stay focused on that, good things happen and it works out. You have struggles, but you always win. And my biggest, I stopped watching the news after the last election. Yeah, every kind of news. I mean, right. Every station, because it was just disturbing my peace. Right. I couldn't deal with it anymore. Right. And what I found is that the more I can keep my focus on, God's plan for my life, what to do today, his wisdom in this moment, what choices to make, what decisions to make, how to interact with this child or that or the other, and pray my way into getting there. And then I'm able to keep my peace and not get disrupted and afraid and struggle and go through all that stuff. You hit obstacles, but you always get past them. And, like my wife, a lot of times we'll watch a TV show or two together in the evening, a Hallmark show, or I like crimes movies where the good guys win, NCIS, and yet the commercials are, so full of hypnotic garbage, especially the medications that want to convince you that, you take this pill and your eye might fall out and you might go deaf, but you're
definitely going to have diarrhea.
Yeah. And I just, I record the shows and fast forward through them because I don't want to listen to that. Right. I don't want to listen to, somebody telling me that something's going to happen to me and disturb my peace or change what I believe, just because they're trying to sell me something. Right. And then sometimes, when you can't, like my wife is a voracious basketball fan. We watch every Mavericks game, and she likes to watch them in real time. I don't. I want to fast forward through the commercials, so I'll watch them in real time with her. But then I'll talk back to these commercials. No, that's not going to happen to me. No, and I just talk back to them. And that drives her bananas, because I'm talking back to the commercials. But to me, the challenge in this day and time is just keeping your peace. If you can just what the scripture tells us, that the kingdom of God is within us, and it's righteousness, peace, joy in the Holy Spirit, and that we're to guard our heart with all diligence, for out of it flow all the issues of life. And to me, the real assignment is staying there. And everything around you is so easy to get distracted and get sucked into.
Right.
But if you can get to the place where you can stay there, and I'm not there, I still struggle with it from time to time, but I'm a lot better at it than I used to be. Haven't arrived, but at least I've left. I'm on the way.
You see the possibility.
Yeah, I'm on the way. To me, that's what anybody could do. And it's so much better than, being afraid of the government and afraid of this going to happen, or afraid of that. And, or your arm is going to, go to sleep, or your eyeball's going to fall out on this pill or that or the other. To me, if we can just get to a place where we can stay focused and peaceful, decipher God's perfect will and his perfect plan, do whatever's necessary to walk in it, and get whatever grace from God you need to do it. I think that's kind of the sweet spot of life.
Oh, that's great advice. And I think a great place for us to end this first of what I'm hoping are a couple of conversations that we'll have over the next few years. So thanks very much for coming out today.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you soon.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Bye.
We'll see you guys. Bye-bye. Greetings and welcome to the Growing the Next Version of You show. Every week or so, I get together with thought leaders and we talk about the trends that are happening in the world, and we think of life from a mind, body, and spirit perspective, because that's what servant leaders do. So join me